Hey guys, Zach Casagoon Miniatures here from the Grimdark Compendium, and this week we're going to be taking a look at Villainy Inc.'s Decay of Death, an enamel weathering effect that will see tons of use in the Grimdark style of painting. This enamel effect is perfect to use in applications for rot and decay. It even has practical use in environmental effects for wood, moss, fungus, or even slime if handled properly. But that isn't everything we're going to be talking about in this video. To make it a bit more interesting, I'll also be giving you guys 5 simple tips for how to make your miniatures more grimdark. But before we get started, let's talk about what I'm happy to announce will be the final Villainy Inc. pre-order update. So I've finally received those pesky SDS forms for the UK and EU, and the North American SDS will be following shortly. This means that shipping can now begin, so keep an eye on your emails for shipping notifications. And just know that there are an absolutely massive amount of orders for me to pack and ship, so just be patient with me as I work through them. Also, for you guys who have been asking about where you can pick these up in the EU and the UK, I'm happy to say that Element Games and PK Pro have both started their pre-order period, so make sure to head over to their respective websites and get those pre-orders in, and I'll have links for those down in the description for you. Before I move on, guys, let me just say that I am extremely grateful for all of the support and thousands of messages that I've received over the last several months. I really appreciate you guys helping me to create and launch the Villainy Inc. line. It has been really amazing, and the amount of orders that have been coming in lately is utter insanity. The fact that we are able to set up a small production facility that enables us to manufacture our own product line from scratch with the aid of the fans of the Grimdark Compendium and members of the Grimdark community is just mind-blowing to me. I mean, we didn't even run a proper Kickstarter or anything. I couldn't be more grateful to you guys, so I definitely really appreciate it. Now, I just have to get these enamels in people's hands and hope they like them as much as I do, so we can continue to grow the enamel range of colors and then branch off into oils and acrylics. Alrighty guys, so without further ado, let's get into this video and take a look at the 5 tips that you can learn to make your miniature modeling and painting more grimdark. Coming in at number 5 is kitbashing and converting to create your own versions of technological horrors, ultra-realistic and true-scale space marines, or dark and demented fantasy characters. The lore of the Warhammer universe is deeply disturbing, so much so that some of the original lore has been outright scrubbed from the record or changed to be more palatable. Despite the appearance of what our little plastic figures look like off the shelf, the stories behind them are indeed dark and brutal. So this is something we as grimdark artists can capitalize on and use to craft truly horrifying creations that are fitting and believable. Even though we can explore and harness the potential of millions of bits from not only Warhammer kits but also resin and my personal favorite scale model kits, there's something else that we can do that is much more simple, and that is to incorporate typical grimdark tropes into our builds and bases. Grimdark tropes are things like skulls, chains, spikes, candles, tapestries, wires, and so on. Adding things like skulls is simple enough with the skull kit that Games Workshop sells, as well as 3D printed or resin skulls. We can simply place a skull in a compositionally mindful way, either on the figure or the base, just something that looks cool. Or we can even make little spikes, ropes, or chains that have skulls on them. Spikes and wires are easy to make using copper or brass wiring. A jeweler's chain is easy to find on storefronts like Amazon or Temu and are typically ready-made in the correct scale for miniature art. Candles are easy to 3D print or pick them up from a supplier that 3D prints them in the 28mm scale, and tapestries or cloth can be made from mundane materials like cheesecloth or rolling papers. So, as you can see, there are a lot of little things that we can do to add a little touch of darkness or a more morbid aesthetic to our miniatures when kitbashing using common materials or bits that are easily obtained. So get your bits together, pick up some skulls, candles, copper wires, cheesecloth, and if you need some guidance, feel free to join us on the Grimdark Compendium. and then see what you can come up with. Alright, so coming in at number 4 is going to be adding textures, spattering, and modeling. Not modeling, but modeling to your minis. Textures are easy to employ. They're simple in concept and can be either added before or after your miniature has been painted. They can be added minimally or heavily to achieve various types of effects, and luckily there is a huge selection of texture paints to choose from in the hobby space. AK Interactive, Ammo by Meg, Vallejo, Citadel all have a plethora of different textures to choose from. Typically these texture paints are used for basing, but Vallejo in particular has a line of spatter paints that are just awesome to use. Texture applications can be implemented to add cool effects to miniature, terrain, or even figures. A marine trudging through the remains of his slain enemies, or the buildup of gunk or mud on terrain is just an excellent way to add a grimdark feel to your miniature. So textures are a cool way to be grim and can even help to add a bit of narrative to the miniature. Spattering, and I'm not just talking about blood spattering, that's a given, is a technique that can be used in both texturing and modeling and is used to create variations in either color or texture. Spattering can be used on the side of vehicles or in the lower areas of the figure to show mud splashes, chemical splashes, oil splashes, swamp muck, or any substance that you can think of. Spattering can be used to apply heavier effects like textures and even lighter effects like the ones you will find on modeled flesh. So modeling, or to model, is to create an arrangement, usually a random arrangement of colored spots or blotches onto a surface. In a grimdark and dystopian scenario, I'd like to imagine that most people you encounter will have highly irregular skin complexion that will show various amounts of modeling or slight little blotches of discoloration. The hard surface variation of modeling is, as I said, the early signs of distressing. So something like little sunspots, early formations of rust, grease stains, or even an old splash of mud where most of the mud has flaked off and only a little ring of brown stain remains. These are all examples of modeling and are a fantastic way to demonstrate the effects of dwelling within a dark and dystopian world. So, coming in at number 3 is adding battle damage effects like chipping, scratching, and dings to your miniature to make them look battle-hardened and grim. This can be approached in one of several different ways. There is painted-on chipping, which is probably the most accessible way, but requires a little more skill than other methods like using chipping medium or fluid or even salt chipping. Painted-on chipping can be rendered with a brush, or another popular way to do it is to use a small sponge and tweezers. But as I said, this approach takes a little bit more control and skill to render effectively, and depending on how detailed you want to be, it can take much longer. Painted-on chipping is going to be the best on smaller miniatures where the opportunity for chipping is going to be limited, and on tiny surfaces that require the most control. Using chipping fluid, which is my favorite method, is when you lay down a couple of thin coats of an acrylic medium that reactivates with water. You add this medium after primer but before base colors. Chipping medium should be only slightly dried with the cool air, very important that you use cool air, or the air from your airbrush. It has a limited working time, so you need to be quick about things and finish your chipping before the medium completely cures, which doesn't take long. But the results are typically the most convincing and lifelike. As I said, this is my favorite method, but on smaller miniatures like the ones I mentioned earlier, chipping with fluid or a medium can be a bit unwieldy because you're using a tool to remove the paint back down to the previous layer. Of course, other bits and the limbs of a miniature can get in the way of you properly controlling your tool, but this can be avoided by sub-assembly if it's necessary. Another form of chipping is saw chipping, commonly used on vehicles, armor panels, or just larger miniatures with flat surfaces. The idea is pretty straightforward. You create a mask by using crushed up rock salt and a little water to help the salt stick to the miniature. You then add your base color, and then once that's dry, remove the salt. So this is a cool one. I definitely recommend giving it a try the next time you paint a large vehicle. And something similar to that method is using a latex masking fluid, though it requires much more control and takes longer to apply. Finally, for battle damage, there is soft pressing, a phrase that I coined a few years ago for adding very controlled, distressing, tiny surface scratches and chipping. This technique is typically applied as a final detail once the miniature has been painted, or at least when the base colors and washes are in place. Soft pressing takes advantage of the soft nature of paint, and along with a hard-edged tool like an airbrush needle or a metal toothpick, and a good set of magnifiers is used to create very tiny, very slight mark making onto the armor panels of a miniature that are to scale and read correctly from a normal viewing distance. When taking a look at this example, it may seem that the effect is very heavy, but when we pull back and view the miniature normally, the soft pressing effect appears very slight. So this is one I definitely highly recommend giving chipping and soft pressing a shot. These techniques are a great way to move your miniature towards the Grimdark aesthetic. Coming in at number 2 is using weathering paints to create highly realistic effects onto your miniature. Grime, rust, decay, oil, and mud, all of these things will fit perfectly on any Grimdark miniature and can turn any standard painted miniature into a Grimdark masterpiece if properly handled. The best versions of these types of paints will typically be enamels due to how they dry matte and have a slight granular effect to them, save for the rust effect. Even though it's not in my best interest, I must say that the absolute best rust effect on the market today is dirty down rust. Other than it being water-based, I really have no idea how it's made or how it does what it does, but this stuff is pretty crazy at creating the most realistic rust effects that I've ever seen. Decay of Death by Villainy Inc. is another really awesome weathering tool to create realistic decay effects. To use these enamel weathering paints, we apply them straight out of the bottle or slightly thinned with mineral spirits, drying them with a hairdryer on high heat to get the chalky effect, and then doing a dry removal with a soft bristled brush. Decay of Death can be used to decay flesh and wood, and even to create a lighter patina effect over aged bronze. Goon's Grime, Decay of Death, Ikra the Damned, Dystopian Brown can all be used to create weathering effects in various ways, either through unifying washes, streaks, spatter effects, crevice washes, or modeling. Enamels are going to be your best bet for getting those really convincing weathering effects that can help you tell a story about where your miniature has been and the tribulations it has been through. So, if you want to paint Grimdark, I definitely recommend picking up some enamels for fantastic weathering purposes. Alright, so the number one thing you can do to help your miniature art be more Grimdark is to craft a narrative. All the things that I mentioned in this video really lead to one thing, and that is the story behind your miniature's appearance. Through kitbashing, we can add little details that enrich the story of our miniatures. Textures, spattering, modeling, and the use of weathering effects can tell the story of what environment the miniature is either in or the environments they have endured. Chipping or soft pressing can be used to illustrate the damage or special wounds that they have received in battle. So all these tips tie everything together and help us tell these little stories, which in my opinion is one of the coolest and most wholesome parts of the miniature hobby. Even if the narrative is only known to you, that's fine. Making a story behind your miniature will enrich your hobby experience. It can either be just for you, or you can share it with your friends or gaming group who will probably think it's awesome, and they might even become interested in narrative play, or at least coming up with a narrative for their own projects. Back when I first got into Warhammer, my brother and I used to play Dark Angels versus Space Wolves, and the most fun part of that was just coming up with a story behind the skirmishes. So, narrative guys, I definitely suggest you try this out when sitting down with your miniature products. I mean, after all, the stories unfolding in the Warhammer universe are truly dark and dystopian, and embracing this idea by forging your own narrative will fill you with the spirit of what it is to make truly grimdark miniatures. Okay guys, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to check out the Grimdark Compendium. All the techniques I talked about today can be found on the Grimdark Compendium website, and there they are explained in great detail. Most of them are part of our Learn Grimdark course that's free, and a lot of those miniatures showcased in today's video have full painting courses behind them. So make sure to check that out, grab your Villainy inks while you're there, and I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll catch you in the next.